This is my baby tank slash hospital tank slash grow out tank. I've been waiting to escape this until today, Christmas Day. As you can see, it is pretty due for a rescape. So I'll be moving these balloon mollies on out and over to my big tank. I'm all prepared with my bucket, rocks, net, place to put plants, and here goes nothing. The balloon mollies have been in quarantine for over 6 weeks. They were purchased from PetSmart and Petco, so I wanted to be super careful, but I haven't seen anything suspect come from them, so today's the day. Alright, first things first, I gotta get all this Alodia and floating plant out so I can catch the fish and get rolling. This Alodia has been growing like a weed, literally. Now these floating plants have been growing aerial roots that have reached into the substrate by now, making this a bit of a challenge. As you can see, it does not want to cooperate. So I just yank it on out so we can get a move on. I did get a pair of guppies and put them in this tank. 2 mixed guppies, and they have been breeding like there is no tomorrow, so there has to be at least 50 fry in here, plus the 6 balloon mollies, which will be moving out today. Alright, now that I've got all the floating plant out, except that little bit right there, I can start catching up the balloon mollies. But I then realized that I have not disconnected the heater and filter first. I cannot stress to you guys how important it is that before you do anything with a Rescape that you disconnect your heater and your filter. This tank is running a hang-on back filter, little nano hang-on back, and the sponge filter. So now that I make sure those are off, we can continue. The balloon mollies I have in here are 4 females and 2 males. 2 of them are copper color, and 3 of them are gold, and 1 of them is a Dalmatian. I've just realized that I caught 2 guppy fry in before I could get the balloon mollies, and so optimistically I try catching them with my hand and then realize that that's not going to work. and so I opt for ye old trusty net. Thankfully, these mollies were pretty easy to catch. To my absolute surprise, this female guppy decided to choose right now, after I got all the balloon mollies, to have more fry, which I was lucky enough to get on video. And now back to the mollies. Got a nice release clip for you into my bigger tank, which I call Schmuttsville. So far so good here. As you can see, my male gold balloon molly, who I've been calling Nugget, is more interested in breeding than being in the new tank. Alright, breakdown done. As you can see, I've got everything in a bucket. Those are the guppies that are going to go back in the tank with the sponge filter in there to save bacteria. All the plants and stuff with a air stone, again to try and save any beneficial bacteria I can, so when I fill back up, it won't be too much of a problem. Alright guys, on to the fun part. This is sped up a couple of times, but I'm starting with stratum for the base layer, as we'll be doing live plants, and it's important to have a nutrient-rich substrate of some kind. I am going for about an inch at least as my bottom layer. And now I'm just trying to make sure I have at least an even 1-inch layer of stratum across the bottom. And now for a sand cap, which I'm going to be going for at least 2 inches above the stratum to cap it off and keep all those nutrients down and minimize the amount of effect it'll have on my pH. It's also important to add a sand cap to keep your bottom nutrient layer from leaching into the water column over time. This will also give me a little extra depth to plant into, and I am trying to bank up the back with more sand towards the back of the tank to give me more depth. You really want to be sure that you have a solid cap over your nutrient bottom layer to avoid any future algae outbreaks. If you don't cap your nutrient-rich layer, the nutrients will leach into the water column, and then it'll be an algae fest, which we do not want. And now we're going to start with the Hardscape. I like to start with my biggest rocks first, and I will just kind of chuck them in and move them around until I get something I like. After the biggest rocks are placed, I then go for my driftwood. Again, just chucking it in, seeing what looks good until I'm happy. Choice of wood so far is Mopani on the right, and then I add a big piece of spiderwood to the left. I do not worry too much about using all one color of rock or type of rock, as I believe the color variation adds more interest to the scape, and I will also go back with different sized rocks and different textures to get a more natural feel. After the rocks and wood are placed, I then go back in with smaller, more detailed stones, more like a gravel, scatter gravel, and I'll just randomly sprinkle it over top of the bigger rocks and just let them fall where they will. Doing this gives you the most natural look. Something you definitely want to think about when you're doing your hardscape is where you are going to put your filter, what kind of filter you're going to use. Make sure you plan around filter placement and also your heater or any other equipment you'll be putting in, as I've made the mistake before where I didn't and I wound up with no space for any of the equipment I needed to use. Alright, onto the plants. Now, first thing, before I filled it with any water, I placed my epiphyte plants, which would be the Anubias. I went with Anubias nana, some Boost, and Anubias nana petite. You want to glue those onto your hardscape before you fill it with water. And I'm setting up a light so we can see what we're doing here. The plants I chose to go with are Vallisneria, which is the first thing I'm putting in the background. You want to start by putting your tallest plants in the background area, and then your medium plants in the mid-ground, and then your shortest plants in the foreground. Next, I'm going to be adding Crypt Wendetti green to the midground. And now for the foreground, I've chosen Dwarf Sagittaria, which, because it was growing in the previous scape, it's all connected from where it was producing runners. So I just break them off where they attach to each other and plant them individually all along the foreground. Next, I'll be adding the rest of the vow to the background. The idea is that once it grows in, it will create a back curtain of vow scenario. And next is some Crypt Lutea to the midground, just behind the Mupani wood on the right. And now we're gonna go for some Tiger Lotus, hopefully to block out the sponge filter. Once that grows in, you want to plant Tiger Lotus with most of the bulb out of the substrate. You do not want to bury it or it will rot. So I try to only bury just a small portion of the bulb. And aside from some last few bits of Dwarf Sag in the foreground, this pretty much wraps up the build. All that's left to do is fill it the rest of the way with water, add the heater, and hang on back filter back. the rest of my balisson area to the background. Next I'll be adding some crypt lutea. And then I'll be going for some tiger lotus. Now when you plant tiger lotus, you want to make sure that the bulb is not completely buried. You can bury a little bit of it, but you want most of it sticking out of the substrate. Wound up finding more dwarf sage I had, so I'm just filling in any open places until I am happy with the look. Alright, that pretty much wraps up the build. Now all that's left to do is get the guppies back in there, fill the tank the rest of the way, and add the heater and my hang-on back filter.